Charlotte is finally getting to War of the Visions. She is the third Knight of Grenchelt, and she acts in a very similar way to Rain, in that she's a magic tank. The only difference is Rain is magic-based, while Charlotte is physical-based. Today we'll take a look at her kit, her abilities, how to build her, and just generally whether she'll be good or not for your account and worth pulling for. Before I dive into all that though, I do want to say if you guys are intending to pay and get some Viz, you should use an Amazon affiliate link. It saves you some money onto the Viz that you get, and it also supports the person whose link you use. I have one, there's a lot of other War of the Visions content creators that have some. Make sure you support somebody from the content creation community. It really helps keeping us going. So with that said, let's dive in. Charlotte, like I said, is a magic tank, and one of her main assets is the fact that she's physical based. She does not need to be ran at a high faith compared to a lot of other characters, and when you're at 97 faith, you take roughly half as much magic damage as a character at 50 faith. It's a huge difference. So even if she had the exact same stats as Rain, for example, she would tank for a longer time, because nobody runs Rain at low faith. He just loses all his offensive efficiency if you do that. In her case, she brings a couple new things to the table as well. She's got high spirit debuff resistance. What that means is it's really hard to reduce her spirit. She has an ability that increases that by 50%, and a passive that does it. If you have both currently equipped, her spirit can just not go down. Same for defense, but that's really relevant because of Black Witch Helena, who has an ability that decreases spirit by 30 before dealing damage. And then she is the first unit in the game with an ability to reduce counter chance. Tired of getting reflexed? You can just use that, and then for 3 turns, Frederica can no longer use reflex. So that's a bunch of new mechanics that I think make her very interesting. Outside of that, I mean, move 3, jump 1, uses shields, armors, and helm, so it's basically a paladin job with different abilities. She does have the master ability for lightning, so she's going to increase lightning characters, gets own tanky buffs for herself, so that's nice. And then her TMR is super powerful, very, very cool, but really limited because it's a shield, meaning only main job paladins and herself can actually equip that right now. Gives a lot of HP, a good spirit, and then just like Black Witch's TMR, it has an ability that decreases damage taken by 35% for 3 times, and then also restores a little bit of AP. So overall, very solid piece of gear, but almost nobody's going to use it, so don't pull her for the shield, pull her for the unit if you're interested into her. Now, we don't have a character right now with the exact same concept as Charlotte, so we'll compare her with Rain, who's the other spirit-based tank in the game, and then Mont, just because I believe he's the best tank overall. He is much weaker to magic though, so they fit different roles, Charlotte compared to King Mont. So, in terms of HP, she's the lowest one of the bunch. She doesn't even cross the 5,000 mark, so she's going to be a little bit more squishy compared to the other guys, unless she's especially resistant to the attacks that come in. She's almost as fast as King Mont though, which is really good. One of the main things that make King Mont so dominant is the fact that he goes so quickly. He can keep buffing several times, and then he's not like a really slow-moving turtle that you can walk around. Charlotte is also super fast. She's got roughly the same amount of luck as King Mont, but she'll be a bit less accurate because she doesn't have those accuracy up passives that King Mont uses. And then, well, she has even more attack than King Mont, which is cool, but attack is not her jam. You will not be building her for insane amounts of damage. Her hits will be relevant. They can be used to start off an enemy or finish off an enemy, but don't expect her to one-shot someone. That's not what she's there for. Movement 3, jump 1. She can increase that to movement 4, jump 1, which isn't terrible. And then her really main asset is 22 spirit, which is really good. I believe we've all seen how much spirit Rain can get with his base 23 spirit, and Charlotte can do the exact same thing. It is possible for her to go all the way to 100 spirit if you build her for that, so that's fairly impressive. But a 22 base is really good, and then she has passives to work on top of that. Then, looking at her resistances, she actually has a really solid kit. Slash resist, magic resist, missile resist. These are the most common damage types right now. Eventually, the piercing and earth weaknesses will be a problem against characters like Oberon, but she's a magic tank. She's not designed to fight these characters anyways, so you should not be bringing her against them. And then she has resistances to Paralyze, Toad, not that impactful, but resistance against Berserk is really good if you want to pair her against King Mont, because with that and the fact that she's not ran at a very high faith, she's basically immune to it. Then, looking at her stat progressions, I think she's a character that you can safely stop at 115 and get a lot of value out of her. You do lose out on about 500 HP and a little bit of attack, which is not great, but I mean, she doesn't get any spirit or any agility from 115 to 120, so I think that can work. Also, her 120 ability that we'll look at in a minute is good, but it's not defining. She has a lot of use outside of that. So I think if you're short on Viz, you definitely want her, but don't necessarily want to go all out. Just get her to 115 and slowly farm those other mind spheres through hard quests. You'll eventually have her, but don't spend Viz all the way there, especially if you're on limited resources right now. Now, to begin looking at her kit, passives, she has the defense and spirit debuff resistance that I just talked about. If you're not familiar with what that does, every time you're affected by a defense down or spirit down effect, it rolls a X% chance, X being the skill's value, and then if you get it, you just don't get the debuff. So she has 50% chance to not be affected by a spirit debuff or a defense debuff. Then she has other ways to increase that with her abilities. Then I would say the HP and Spirit up is pretty much a must, because you'll always want to use Charlotte against magic-based characters. That is her strength. She's not a great physical tank. So because of that, HP and Spirit is just naturally good for her. And then I like the idea of move and agility up. I think if I'm fighting an enemy that decreases my Spirit, I'm going to use the first passive. Otherwise, I'm probably going to put Thief Lore instead and increase my mobility. That's my go-to here. Now, in regards to her counter abilities, I would love it if you guys could inform me. I've tried testing it out or watching videos, never really got the answer to that. Does her counter ability that increases spirit stack with other sources of spirit up buff? I don't think it does, right? Because buffs of the same type don't stack. If it doesn't, it's pretty much useless, because she already has a buff that increases her spirit, so why would you want that counter? I would be more tempted to run the Thief Lore counter, where she increases her own agility when she gets hit, and then plays faster for her next turn. Or maybe even just countering with a punch to the enemy's face, because that's kind of funny. So yeah, food for thought, not sure about the counters. Her limit burst though, really cool. She gets the super large AoE pattern with high damage, and then it's going to decrease attack and magic for the targets by 39%. That's going to be impactful depending on who you're targeting. They're probably going to lose out on around 200 of their stat if they're powerful attackers or powerful mages, and then increases her own defense and spirit by about as much as a sentinel for a single turn. So overall, very solid ability to throw out, especially when you have hate and the enemies are going to hit you for the next turn. So I love this one a lot. Now, looking at her abilities, the first one you definitely want on at all times because it's her way to gain hate. This ability increases her hate and then defense and spirit debuff, as we just talked about. She has a stun ability in the line, that's fine, that's cool. Then her noble or glorious armor increases her defense and spirit by 20 for 3 turns, gives her protect, shell, and regen. With that, she basically becomes an unkillable tank for a long time. The only thing is, you want this buff in second priority, because if she doesn't have hate and she uses that, then enemies are just going to ignore her. So just make sure you have hate before you start generating this. Then, Lightning Strike is one of the most unique abilities in the game right now. It's going to decrease lightning resistance, which is really cool for lightning unit affinity, and then it's going to reduce counter chance by 100% for the enemy before dealing damage, which means they cannot counter that. That's really nice. And then they can't counter for 3 turns. It also deals a 210% damage mod, which is a really high mod, but again, she's not a primary damage dealer, so that's going to deal okay damage, but don't expect one-shots out of that. Then Speed Punish, sure, AoE damage that decreases agility, there's always some nice utility you can throw around. It's also her only real AoE attack in her main job, so it's nice to have. Then talking about her 120 ability, it's really cool, right? It increases all attack resistances by 8% for allies around her. That's super interesting. But here's the thing, she has 2 great single target buffs that she has to use on herself before she gets into a fight. I don't know how often she'll have time to use the Granshelt Wall before hitting the enemy team. Also, these kind of AoE abilities keep your tanks back and make sure that they're not that far forward because they want to go and target your other allies with them. So depending on the setup and how it tweaks your AI, you'll probably have that off in many auto matches. Great tool for manual though, I would definitely use it often in this. Then her sub-job is actually very interesting, and the other sub-jobs I'm not that convinced about, so I would probably run her as a Knight of the Holy Shield. The ability to increase lightning, water, and dark resist in a wide AoE is really cool if you're fighting these guys. It won't always be strong, but when it is, it's a really good buff. And then she gets an AoE attack with Paralyze. Don't think I would ever really prefer that on top of the ability that reduces counter chance or the one that decreases agility. So that one, not that useful, but the Blessing of the Holy Fort is really good. Also, keep in mind when you're talking about her stun and her paralyzed chance, she's probably not going to have super high faith, so these will not be reliable. They'll just be like a nice added bonus to your attack if they ever land. Now, her two other sub-jobs, I don't know if I would run them very often. It would probably be for a very specific need or a specific build. First one is Monk, gives her access to strike attacks, which is cool, gives her access to Store if you want to do some damage. Pummel is her only 2-hit ability, so that's something. But overall, not incredibly wide amount of scenarios where I would prefer this over her own sub-job. And then Thief, it's great if you want to support your evasion teammates with steal accuracy. You have steal time for some raid shenanigans, and then it's her only guaranteed hit with sneak attack from behind the enemy team, but that's basically it. I don't think these sub-jobs are as good as the elemental protection in an AoE in most matchups. So let's look at a first build, which is supposed to be a more all-arounder build, where she has some defense and some spirit, so she can resist all-around types of damage. Of course, she's still specialized towards magic tanking, but if you're fighting a team that has at least one physical attacker, you probably want something like this, where you have a decent amount of defense. I would be running the Golem Esper for that, so you have a little bit of both. Overall, 8500 HP, 25 to 45 defense if she uses her own buff, 46 to 66 spirit, makes it for a good amount of bulk, especially since she creates her own protect and shell. So she should be able to stay in the fight fairly long. 800 attack means she has alright damage, nothing out of this world though, and she's fairly mobile with a movement of 4 too, so you know, good overall performance. I would pair her with other lightning characters since she can imperil lightning. Frederica, 9S, really good characters to fit with her. Otherwise, just a healer in general. When you have somebody with so much mitigation on the attacks they take, every bit of HP you heal has a lot of value, right? If the enemies only hit her for 2,000 and you're healing her for 6,000 at a time, well, it's just really good value. I think you've all seen Yuna with King Mont and then how hard it is to take him down a second time. You can do the same with any other kind of healer and Charlotte. And she's also a really good partner for characters like Moore or other characters that can take magic attacks really well, because she'll walk in close to the enemy Black Witch Helena. She can take Black Witch Helena's punishment, but Black Witch excels at hitting multiple of your characters at once, even taking like your tank and your DPS together. So if the DPS you use to support your Charlotte can also take hits from the Black Witch, that's where you have a super bulky team that will actually just survive through the hits and finish her off slowly. Then you should avoid characters that can decrease your defense, or at least change your passives so that you have the defense down immunity. So characters like Runestern that are going to Hazard Crusher you are going to be a huge threat if you're not prepared for them. Otherwise, characters that will reduce your slash resistance are also a fairly high threat because you don't have a lot of physical survivability. You're mainly there for the mages. So if these guys are hyper carries and deal insane damage to you, Charlotte will go down in 2 to 3 hits still. And then Ketone. Drain Force. That's going to two-shot Charlotte, so be very careful when fighting her. She is a naturally good counter to tanks in general, and even more so with the element advantage to Charlotte. What you can use to mitigate that damage if you want to is use single target resistance. So something like the pod that we have right now will reduce incoming Drain Force damage since it is a single target attack. Now, what would this build look like if we decided to forego the physical resistances and just go all in into magical tanking? Well, we can instead go into a fight with 66 base spirit, put that up to 86 if we're using the defensive buff that we have. And on top of that, why not have 50% magic resistance? So it is possible to make her a lot more resistant to magical-based attacks if you're planning a Guild Wars team and you know you'll only be targeting enemy teams with very high amounts of magic. That would be a build I would go for. Or in Arena, if you know what you're fighting, right, and you can make sure you avoid any kind of physical threat in the enemy team, that build is going to excel because she'll never go down, and she has a fairly high amount of hate herself, so it's going to take a while before the enemy team starts targeting your other guys. So with all that said, what's my verdict? Well, I think she'll be a really good unit, and I think everybody's account would do better with it. But she is not time limited, and we're currently getting, unit of choice tickets once in a while and whatnot. If you have Amazon Prime, you just got one, you'll get another one fairly soon. So don't pull. That's my thing. Get her through one of these tickets, or get her naturally. But we are in between time-limited stuff and even more time-limited stuff with Final Fantasy VII just around the corner, probably in mid-September. It's not the time to pull for a unit, I think. So unless you have plans for her, or you've been waiting for her for a super long time and you absolutely want to build her, I would hold off. How would she perform in different game modes? I think in PvE, it'll depend on the map, but if it's a map with lots of incoming magical damage, like the Nightmare Challenge we just got, she would do a really good in there. She would have a lot of tanking capabilities, and she would be able to just do the job right. So she would excel in some maps, not a farmer though, she's really just a tank. In Arena, perfect. You can target the enemies that have only magic threats and just completely destroy them, so it's the best game mode for her. Guild Battle, almost as good, because you can target enemies that have high magic, and so if she survives the first battle, she'll just generate hate again and do the exact same thing for battle 2. Just be careful of who you target, but generally, characters with high magic are all going to have magic scaling abilities, which means her high spirit will apply. So that should do well generally. Just cross your fingers that you don't target a Luel that can get to 80% spirit penetration, because that might be a little bit tougher. Then manual PvP, she seems good, but not as good as other options. Like, I would totally prefer to have a Dwayne or a King Mont over her. The reason for that is she doesn't have a trump card. She doesn't have a move that she uses and just straight up wins you the game. I can use King Mont to just AoE Berserk the whole enemy team, or Dwayne to destroy shields and possibly disable. For her, her power play is like you can't counter for a couple turns. The only reason why I would see her do really well is if you're fighting gunners and you want to make sure that the enemy Frederica can no longer use reflex or something. But overall, not the top tier choice for manual PvP, I think. Auto PvP though, really good, because she can generate hate, and then if the enemies are actually hitting her, well then she'll do a really, really good job. So overall, that's it guys. Hopefully you found it interesting, it brought you some insights. If there are things I forgot to talk about or things you want to add to this, please do so in the comments. I always have pleasure reading and answering to them. So that was it. Thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.